Thank you, Sue. I think that those pictures were really interesting. When else will we get a chance to see those? I don't know. So thank you very much for sharing those with us. Our last speaker tonight is Mike Bamford. He's been working as a consultant since the mid-1980s, specializing in fauna investigations for environmental impact assessment and to meet conditions of approval, such as monitoring of impacts and monitoring of rehabilitation. Mike is a regular guest lecturer at Curtin and Murdoch Universities on a range of topics including fire ecology, techniques of animal sampling, land care, conservation issues, and the origins of and evolution of Australia's fauna. In addition, Mike has been writing weekly wildlife essays in the West Australian for 5 years. It's a big effort, for which he was awarded the Alex Harris Memorial Prize for Science Journalism. Mike became involved in waterbed studies on the Swan River in 1980 and continues to count birds at several locations on the water regularly. Welcome, Mike.
I didn't think you'd read all that. So I'm left-handed, so it's not hard to do this. Okay, so my presentation is going to be slightly different. Oh, and my wife Mandy's here as well. This is a joint presentation, so if there's any hard questions, I'll direct them to her. Yeah, my interest in the Swan River is about water birds, and when I was asked to give a talk, I thought, well, I'll give a general talk about water birds and probably leave you with a bit of a question at the end about where this proposed development fits in with the water birds of the Swan. And there is a link there. A lot of those photographs you've seen, in fact, almost all of the images you see of architects' designs of what this development is going to look like, there'll be a couple of swans tucked in the corner somewhere. And I wasn't asked to prepare a report last year on how to integrate water birds into this development. And believe you me, it wasn't easy. So, my talk is water birds on the Swan. Very briefly, it's been a long association of human beings and water birds on the river. You can read that very quickly. Some of the history is quite interesting. Obviously, the Noongar people had a very close association with the river. Perth water was a hunting ground. Landing, of course, sailed in, saw these really weird swans that were black, which wasn't quite right, and so named it Swan River. Baudin, the French explorer, or the captain of the French expedition in 1801, noticed swans. Charles Fraser, just before settlement, commented on the abundance of aquatic bird life on the river. And there's a theme that keeps on coming up in history, the abundance of aquatic bird life on the river. He also predicted their demise, which was very progressive, I think. Swans are so important to the Perth community that as early as 1890, our society was importing black swans from eastern Australia, pinioning them, which means they cut off one of their wings, or part of one of their wings, so they can't fly away, and releasing them on Perth water. So there will be swans on Perth water, so 122 years ago. And on a broader scale, and I'm going to talk a lot broadly about the river, not just the development we're talking about tonight. The Swan Estuary is actually recognised under the Ramsar Convention as a site of international importance. Mainly for a little migratory bloke called redneck stint, which you probably wouldn't notice unless I pointed them out to you because they're about that big. But they breed in northern Siberia, so they're pretty cool. Well, everyone else had historical photographs. That's my best one. I don't know who took it. It was given to me by a guy in a photo shop who said, "You're interested in the Swan River? Take these." He found them in the back of the drawer. But that's the, now this bridge being constructed in the late 50s, about when I was born. So early on, the Perth water was used for hunting and fishing and shooting, quite literally. Swans and other ducks and waterfowl are flightless when in molt. They gather on large bodies of water where they feel safe, which means in a small boat with a club in your hand, you could hunt them. And that's what Europeans did during the 19th century. After that, of course, Sue's introduced the whole idea of tidying up the shoreline, making it nice and straight, as it should be, not like nature intended. And of course, what better thing to do with the foreshore around the Swan River than to dump rubbish there and cover it up with sand. Burswood Island, South Perth, Alvin Cove. The bit of my bio that wasn't mentioned was that in about 1965, from the South Perth rubbish tip in here. I attempted to sail across Perth water on a mattress. We didn't make it. What does this mean for water birds? That's really all I care about. Okay. Initially it was a period of intense hunting, really intense hunting. Massive destruction of numbers of birds. Then, by the late 19th century, a whole reversal. We want swans back on Perth water. Where do we get them from? Victoria. Makes sense. What we're seeing now, though, is quite different. Then, of course, there was a period of habitat loss, big-scale habitat loss. You tidy up the natural shoreline, replace it with concrete walls, all your habitat's gone, or much of it's gone. Since the 1960s, which was the last phase of habitat loss, really, which was the narrows interchange, the sort of issues have changed to matters of disturbance, and water birds really don't cope well with high levels of human activity in their habitat. So disturbance is an issue. For water birds, water quality on the Swan River probably isn't as much of an issue as it is, say, for aquatic organisms or fully aquatic organisms. Still potentially a problem. I'm sorry about the pun there, I should have got rid of that, but sea level change, it is a problem, and I'll get on to more of that later. It doesn't, whether you can, I'm not going to get into the argument about man-induced or not, but sea level change is happening, it's rising, and it's a problem. And we're now seeing proposals for habitat enhancement to bring water birds and other wildlife back onto the river, and that's where I have actually been asked with respect to this development, well, how do we get swans in there as well? So what's happened? Just very briefly, because I've only got 6.5 minutes left. There have been some catastrophic declines of water birds on the river. This is another migratory bird, sharp-tailed sandpiper. Up until the early 60s, many thousands on the Swan River. If you can find 30 on Swan River today, you're doing really well. That was largely because of narrows interchange. They liked samphire marsh as a habitat. Narrows interchange was basically samphire marsh, and all the other bits that have gone before. The bits of the Swan that I'm interested in are actually not the ones that we're talking about today so much, but the marine parks in the greater body of Melville water, of course, away from that spot there. But it's all related. And that's the really important thing about water birds, is that they move around a lot. If there was one part of the estuary system that determines how many water birds you have on the entire system, it's this place here, after the cove, alongside a rubbish tip. You still find bits of rubbish sticking up to the mud. But it's one of the best places for water birds on the Swan River. And what happens there affects what happens elsewhere. And the swans are a good example. A bit of controlled disturbance here has resulted in an increase in swans at this point, and now we're actually seeing black swans pop up all over the place on the river we haven't seen for decades. A few things about water bird biology which makes my life hard in trying to understand them and study them. They're highly mobile, called they're birds. They move between Alpha Cove, Pelican Point and Riu on a daily basis driven by tides. They really like low tide periods because that's when they can access either mudflats or shallows. Swans, for example, graze on the halo fillet, the seagrass that grows in Melville water. They need shallow water to graze on that. That's where the climate change, sea level rise starts coming in. And they move, it's not just, the site on the Swan River isn't a site in isolation. They move between there to the lakes on Mottnest, to the lakes down near Mandurah, the estuary at Mandurah, and they'll move in a couple of hours. These birds could do 100 and something kilometres an hour in flight. That's not very long for them to go down to Mandurah for an afternoon and then come back again. Highly mobile things. And they're distracted by cyclonic rains. I mention that because we count these birds every year and try to make something of the numbers. You get a good cyclone going through and they all pick up their ears or their ultrasonic sensors or something and disappear for the next 6 months and reappear somewhere near Kalgoorlie. It's very frustrating. Okay, disturbance is by far the biggest issue now. And this is all going somewhere. Oh, I've got 2 minutes. Lots of disturbance problems for the birds on the river, but the biggest one by far is just people walking. I won't leave that up very long because I haven't got much time. We did a study some years ago around the river and found the biggest cause of problems for birds was just people walking, because there's so many people walking, because people like to get near the river. There's one person scaring birds. That's a big issue. I'm going to skip through that one. Some quick numbers. What happens to numbers of water birds on the Swan River in its entirety over a nice long period of time? Curlew sandpiper, they've gone. Great knot, that's almost gone. The fence at Alfred Cove has improved things for some birds, and that, you think this project's controversial. There were death threats over that fence. And black swans really like that fence. Unfortunately, no one bothered to count black swans because the people who count water birds like sharp-tailed sandpipers and redneck stints, not swans. Sea devil rise. This is the little redneck stint. It's a ram's ass like redneck stint. It's got very short legs. A 5 centimetre sea devil rise, and it can't feed anymore. So it's pretty much gone from, big numbers. Sea devil rise is good for some things. Oyster catchers are a marine species. Estuary's getting more marine. I'm going to skip to that. Okay. We've had the habitat abuse. We've had disturbance, or having disturbance, sea level rise, and we've got some big issues, but we've got this underlying interest. I wanted to get to this slide before I get gone, because note the date, 1889. I'll let you read that quickly. If any of our politicians want to get a statue of themselves anywhere, this is obviously the way to do it, according to the West Australian 111 years ago. There's actually this real desire to get water birds back into the system, and that's where we actually get back to the Perth Waterfront. There's a desire for birds. The Perth Waterfront is not a landscape or a habitat that's going to be fantastic for birds. I'm sorry, it's small and it's closed and it's cramped and it's deep and it's got sharp banks. So to be really controversial, since I'm told that's what people like to do sometimes, if you actually want water birds as part of the Perth Waterfront, you've actually got to create what they need nearby, and that's in fact a shallows or mudflats area out in the middle of Perth water. So how's that for a controversial note on which to conclude?